Okay, folks are coming online. We're getting everyone promoted here.
Okay.
Chris, I wasn't prepared to do the JPAC one today. Are you going to be able to back clean up for me?
I could back clean up.
Thank you. Because I'm assuming if Rick's here, that means Steve's not doing the JPAC update.
Well, I just had a session with Greg, so I'm kind of teed up for. But go ahead and take the lead. I'll give input if
Okay.
needed.
Chris can introduce the topic, and then Rick can do the color commentary.
Yes, well, you all can.
Okay, so Chair Bubenik, I can confirm we do have a quorum if you'd like to go ahead and get started. We may still be promoting a few folks as they're coming online.
All right. Okay. Well, good afternoon now, since it's 12:01. Welcome everyone to the April 17th Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting. Do we have anyone for public comment, Stephen?
I don't believe we had anyone officially asked to sign up. I did notice Mr. Dave Robinson is in the attendees, and I've had some email correspondence with him and forwarded Teresa Gartner forwarded that on to the committee members earlier today. And so I thought we could offer if Mr. Robinson was interested in speaking. I see his hand is up. I think you should be able to unmute Mr. Robinson.
Yes, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Very nice. Thank you all for the moment to speak. I'd like to address ongoing concerns in the region of the Kingston Terrace Master Plan by King City. There is not, as of yet, an adopted transportation system plan by King City. There is a strong fundamental objection to the roads they are planning. And Mr. Roberts, with all due respect, I do not believe the email I received today answers my specific questions regarding connectivity and guidelines around ensuring that. It is substantively similar to the email response I received on November 8th with cut and paste, and then a few new ideas on appeal and things like that. So I would just ask the people involved to review those questions I've submitted with the point of answering directly the direct questions. And that's all I'll ask today. Thank you very much.
You. Anyone else, Stephen? You're muted, Stephen.
Sorry, trying to spare you my coughing. I don't see anyone else in the attendees with their hand up, but if anyone is interested in providing public comment before the meeting, you can raise your hand now. I'm not seeing anyone else.
All right, that'll bring us to item number 2, introductions and roll call. We have 2 substitutes today, Councilor Ben Beverin from Hillsborough and Councilor Hartmeyer Prigg from Beaverton. Welcome. And
I would note, I think, yeah, Council President
Councilor Ackerball, there you are,
as well.
from Wilsonville. All right.
Yeah, and I'm just giving a quick final skim of the attendees just to see. I think we have everybody promoted that needs to be. So if you're ready, I'll go ahead and do a quick roll call.
Go ahead, proceed.
Great, thank you. For City of Banks, Mayor Jones.
Here.
Thank you. City of Beaverton, Councilor Hartmeyer Prigg.
Here.
Thank you. City of Cornelius, I saw Mayor Delane.
Here.
Thank you. City of Durham, do we have Mayor Sherrado? I don't think we've seen him yet. We'll keep an eye out. City of Forest Grove, do we have Mayor Wenzel? Not yet. We'll keep an eye out for her as well. City of Hillsborough, I saw Councilor Van Beverin is on today. Thank you. I know for King City, Mayor Fender let us know that she wasn't able to attend, and I don't believe her alternate is either. So we were anticipating we might have City Manager Mike Weston attend, who could participate in discussions on the city's behalf, but not vote. So we'll keep an eye out for him as well. I see Mayor Rosner for City of Sherwood.
I'm here.
Thank you. City of Tigard, Mayor Lube.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you. For Tualatin, Mayor Bubenik, of course. Thank you. City of Wilsonville, we had Council President Ackerval.
Here.
And for Washington County Commissioner Nafisa Fai.
I'm here, Stephen, and John with TriMet has his hand raised, and I assume is to be raised to a panelist.
Yeah. I
Steve.
maybe.
Okay.
And
Yep, well-
Stephen, this is Mayor Lenahan.
Yes.
And I know that you know I'm on here, but they're
Oh.
doing some internet work in the community. So if for some reason I all of a sudden disappear, it's been because I've been kicked off. So just giving you a heads up.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Yeah, you were a little bit glitchy there too, so. All right. Well, thank you for joining us in spite of all those obstacles. I appreciate that.
And
Okay, and-
is John, are you, sir, are you covering for Tara today?
Hey,
at
Chris.
TriMet?
Yeah, I'm on for TriMet today. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
We'll
thank
make
you.
you
Yeah,
vote.
so I did want to recognize our non-voting members. We have for Metro, I see Councilor Rosenthal has joined us. Thank you.
Yep. Here.
And for ODOT, Matt Freitag.
Yep, I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you. And I don't believe we have a port representative today. Correct? Okay. All right. I think we're done, Chair. Thank you.
All right. That brings us to our action items. Number 3A, consideration of our meeting summary for March 13th, 2023. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes and look them over? All right. Do I have a motion to approve them?
So moved.
So
All right, I'll take that as a motion in a second there. So I have the motion in a second to approve the meeting summary for March 13th, 2023. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any of those opposed? All right, looks like it's unanimous. Now Stephen has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, for the group, I just wanted to acknowledge that we promoted Mike Weston to a panelist for the city's behalf. And as I mentioned earlier, he'll be able to participate in discussions but not vote. So thank you, Mike.
All right. Okay, that brings us to action item 3B, and that's a TDT expenditure request on behalf of the city of Tualatin, and this will be led by Erin Wardell. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you, Mayor Bubenik. My name is Erin Wardell. I'm the Planning and Development Services Division Manager for Washington County. We have a TDT expenditure request from the city of Tualatin. They would like to spend up to $2 million on improvements to Herman Road. There is a memo and a map in your packet today. County staff have confirmed that this is an eligible expenditure, and at their last meeting, the WCCC TAC recommended your approval.
All right. Any questions for Erin on the project, which is near and dear to Tualatin? Getting that stretch of road fixed from those two huge gullies on the side of the road and getting Herman Road to be fully functional the whole length of as it exists today. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the TDT expenditure request?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the TDT expenditure request for Tualatin. All in favor say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you all. That brings us to item number 4A, the 2023 RTP draft project list and policy outcomes approach. This will be led by Metro Senior Planner Ali Holmquist, who's going to go over a high-level review of the projects, both I believe ours and those in the region, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you very much. I will go ahead and share my screen. and really appreciate the wonderful introduction. I am here to talk about the Regional Transportation Plan project list and some of the updates on work to date. Just as a recap about where we are, a huge thank you to all of the jurisdictions who worked with us really hard earlier this year on the call for projects to submit those lists. We were able to do the QA/QC and compile the information on those. And we're now at the middle portion of our process here that started around March to complete a high-level project assessment and also system analysis on the draft list. And as a milestone that I'll note later in the report, something that we have asked the coordinating committees to endorse as far as the lists on their specific projects. And that's in preparation for the public review process, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on. So there are more than 1,000 projects in the draft list that make up our transportation investment priorities for Greater Portland in the next 22 years. So overall, that represented over $73 billion in total spending. And the capital projects that you see in the chart on the left, those made up about 35% of the constrained project list. So the newer projects, about $25 billion in all. And then operations and maintenance, so really looking at maintaining and operating the system that we have, being a larger portion of the budget of 65% at about $48 billion. And as far as the investment categories, we grouped the projects by type to also show where those investments are going. So again, for the capital projects on the left, that ended up being about 12% of projects supporting walking and bicycling, 11% for transit, 31% for roads and bridges, about 50% between roads and bridges and throughways together, 2% for freight access, projects improving freight access, and then about 2% for projects in information and technology, really improving the efficiency of the existing system. And again, these are the capital or newer projects. And you'll also notice we have a separate indicator. The Interstate Bridge Replacement Program is such a large amount that it's about 24% of the capital project spending on its own. And it is across categories. So it includes elements from really just about all of these categories. And then for the operations and maintenance, returning again to the graph on the right, about 70% of that is in transit service, operations, and maintenance. And then about just over 30% in throughway, road, and bridge maintenance. And then I'll show a couple of graphs that kind of present this information in different ways, and you can kind of see how they'll start to compare to each other as I go through. We also looked at the investment categories for those capital projects, those new projects by cost, just to help us understand how the project list and in the RTP is investing in our different priorities. So you'll see here some of the categories consist of hundreds of smaller projects and some consist of just a few large projects. An example being walking and bicycling, as you can see, has over 302 projects at around $3 billion, while transit has about 43 projects that sum up to a similar amount. And then rounding out the rest of the capital projects, there are also almost 300 projects for roads and bridges at almost, or more than double actually, those amounts that I mentioned before at almost $8 billion. There are 23 projects on throughways at $4.7 billion. You'll again see that Interstate Bridge Replacement Program at about $6 billion on its own. 14 projects supporting freight access at a smaller amount, just under 400 million, and about 47 projects supporting efficiency of the existing system through information technology at almost 600 million. And then we also looked, again, the capital projects by investment category at the cost ranges and the types of projects that are included in those ranges. And so in this graph, in the $3 to $10 million range, you're seeing almost 300 projects. Mostly you're seeing a lot of walking and bicycling projects here, definitely a lot of roads and bridges as well. as well as information and technology. In the $10 to $25 million range, there's a little bit less of the walking and bicycling projects, while roads and bridges hold steady. You're still seeing transit capital, which is in both categories, and information technology. And then in the $25 to $100 million range, we're actually seeing more of the transit capital investments, as well as more freight access investments. And also throughways are starting to really show up here. And roads are pretty much holding steady, but the walking and bicycling projects begin to drop off. And then at the over $100 million mark, we are seeing those throughway projects, transit capital, and then also the roads and bridges. And then at the more than $1 billion mark are the two mega projects, interstate bridge replacement I mentioned before, and then also the Rose Quarter improvement project. Another way that we compared these investment categories for capital spending in particular was by location. So one specific thing I want to mention about this slide, this is not by agency, it's by the physical location in the project. And one of the ways that comes up that's important is, as you can see in the city of Portland, that interstate bridge replacement program, which is partially in the city, is showing up at about 39% of spending, which you can see makes the graph look a little bit different for the city of Portland than some of the other areas. But focusing on Washington County specifically, it's about $9.4 billion in capital project expenditures. About 11% of those are in walking and bicycling, about 13% in throughways, and 4% in those information and technology improvements. Those are a little bit lower than the regional average, although you can see they're mostly consistent with the Multnomah County area that's outside of the city, right above. And there's actually more expenditures in transit capital and roads and bridges than the regional average. We are doing a bunch of outreach around the project assessment and the project list right now that I wanted to mention quickly before I get into the additional assessment results that are coming. There's a survey up right now that is linked, or the link is on the slide here, that's on our website, that is open for comment until May 1st. And then we're also doing targeted outreach through cultural and language specific forums, with our community, or through our community-based organization contracts, additional consultation with tribes and state and federal agencies, and then holding a business leaders forum as well, basically through this month and May. And then I also wanted to provide a preview of work that's going on right now. The assessment will be used to show how individual projects, as well as the collective set of RTP projects, advance each of the 5 regional goals that were developed together earlier in the process in the near and long term. And there's a couple of reasons for completing this assessment. It's verifying that the project list is reflecting the RTP policies. It is producing results that are clear and easy to communicate, interpret, and compare, really thinking about that outreach that we're working on doing, and providing clear information to decision makers, partners, and stakeholders to allow for advanced input, thinking about some of the JPACT meetings that are on the calendar, for instance. Supporting partners and highlighting projects that meet multiple RTP goals. We're actually looking at doing some spotlights for some of the project examples as part of the report out. Making sure that the methods that we were using applied to a diverse set of RTP projects, and that what the approach that we were taking would be achievable within the RTP timeline. And so the results that will be coming will look like this. This is an example of the equity goal area. We have a couple of different questions that we ask to assess whether or not a project meets the goal. In this case, for instance, you can see in the green here whether a project supports an investment category identified as a priority through community engagement or completing gaps in the bicycle, pedestrian, or transit networks. And then the second question in blue here being whether or not the project is located within an equity focus area for the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan. And then the overlap between where the green shaded area overlaps with the blue area, where those projects are considered as supporting the goal area, in this case, equity. And then in the bottom, we're also planning on reporting out whether or not for the near term and long-term lists, so rather than in total, as you can see for the donut above, whether there's any difference between those results. And then we're also working on, for the larger projects, more towards the right in that slide I showed with the cost ranges, doing the same exercise, but using more of the consumer report moons, as I usually call them, to be providing some of the same information. A little bit more information here. It'll be a fully supports, partially supports, or not supports, having a little bit more variety. And then I want to share a few next steps related to this assessment information that's forthcoming and other activities that we have planned. So I mentioned in the recap that call for projects process closing and the work that we've been doing since March on basically providing the assessment information and the summary information. This is information that we're actually reporting out to TPAC next week, and we'll have additional meetings about in the next couple months. And that's the May deadline again, that we're asking that the governing bodies endorse their project lists. And then JPAC and Metro Council in June will be considering input and technical findings and support for the draft RTP that will go out for public review. And just a reminder about that process here for the full RTP. Right now, we are in the phase 4 for building the investment strategy and creating the draft plan. And that is in preparation for this July to start releasing the draft document and doing the public review period before that we look to consider adoption in November. And with that, I'm not Kim, but Kim, just a reminder that Kim is the project manager for this project. And so you'll be hearing more from Kim at a JPAC and other committee meetings soon. I will stop sharing.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Questions for Allie? No one has a question? Come on. Kind of hard to believe. Well, I have a question, then I'll lead it off with. On the public comment and opinion surveys, is that something we should be encouraging from our city councils to get folks to respond and supply that information? Because I think that's critical, especially for Washington County, that I know there are certain constituencies that are very good, very vocal in getting information back to Metro, but sometimes our local constituents aren't very good at that. So how are you going to publicize the polling and the survey and its availability?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. We would love that. We are publicizing it now. I think actually last week we sent out through some of Metro's channels, through our social media, through some of our email lists, and then also because we have the joint contract also through community-based organizations, we have been pushing out the information, but we would absolutely love additional help doing so. And I can make sure that Chris and Jessica have the link to the Metro Quest, and we would love if you send that out.
Yeah, because I'd love to get that out through Facebook, all that good stuff for folks to provide feedback. Because these kind of projects, it's a lot of money, a lot of projects, and hopefully you'll get terrific feedback from the public. Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Ellie, are there plans to do the live and in-person versions also, like we've done in the past, where we'll go out to Clackamas County's, office and meet with them out there, or throughout Multnomah County and Washington County?
Thank you. That's another great question. There have been There are in-person events that are happening now. Right now, most of them are through the culturally specific events that are through the community-based organizations. I was actually at Central Cultural this Saturday where we were doing an event. I don't believe there are, but I think what you're referring to is probably something that happened in the prior RTP where we had maybe more of an in-person session that was beyond that. I don't believe that we have any of those scheduled right now. I think it was mainly the culture specific events. We do have the business forum on the 25th and then the committees, but I can also provide that feedback back to Kim and double check just in case there was something I missed.
Yeah, because those were amazingly well attended in the past where we go out to those. I know we packed the auditorium at Clackamas County at their building. So I'm sure we do similar things again.
Other questions for Ally? I just got one more then. So you mentioned the different categories of projects and that some, obviously cover multiple topics. So how did you decide where to put it? Like say bike ped had something with road. How was it placed in the categories? How would Metro, how they decide what category it would go into?
That's another really great question. In those cases, we would have to go by best fit. So if something was mainly walking and bicycling, it would be denoted as such. But that's an important distinction that a lot of the roads or bridges projects do also have walking or bicycling elements that aren't separated out or included specifically in that category just because we couldn't separate them.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Ally?
Okay, I'll ask one, Frank.
All right.
You seem to be begging. No, I just curious on the survey. I haven't had a chance to go through it yet, and I can distribute it in the community here. In this survey, or in future surveys, do you plan to look beyond just the projects and ask more questions about what I think is missing in some of this, and what briefly I had to look at is kind of what are the kind of longer term, bigger things that we need to be doing, and how do we move people between work centers, and those types of things. I think the surveys in the past and this one seem to be more kind of project oriented. Here's the project submitted, prioritize them, but how are we learning about kind of what the needs are beyond the specific projects that we might have ask as a city or a county, et cetera?
That's another great question. As for one thing we did for needs earlier in the process was we had a survey, gosh, I think it was last summer, that talked about needs by actually precursoring these investment categories. So really splitting those out and asking folks what the needs are before we got to this milestone. And so we do have some really great information as far as the needs. And that's something actually that's been really useful for the Washington County transit study. We were actually able to cross-tabulate and pull the Washington County data and add it to all of the great work that project is doing, for instance. And so we're already seeing some additional uses from that. There are some, for this one, it is more project specific, you're absolutely right. And there is at least a little bit more broad questions around meeting the goals too, so that we could talk a little bit more about the list, but make sure that now that people are seeing the list, that we were able to capture things that maybe didn't come up in the last survey, or just a little bit more broadly. So we do have a question that's more around the goals, and then also some opportunities to provide more specific feedback.
Yeah, because I just as a follow on, or maybe just a comment, our customers for the transportation system aren't just people who live in Metro, right? They're Yamhill County, they're Vancouver, they're all the companies that run shipping up and down the I-5 corridor, and just making sure that we're capturing all of that. Obviously, Northern Yamhill County is a big issue for me here in Sherwood, and the traffic that comes out of that. So, for the future, I think we should be really looking at who's the customer and what does the customer need.
Any other questions for Ally?
And thank you, Ally. Great presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming today, and we appreciate your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
All right. So next up is item 4B, the Metro Urban Growth Report Draft Work Program. This will be more Metro staff. Erin Keel and Ted Reed will discuss the work that's going on. Just as a reminder, the Washington County Coordinating Committee is not only transportation related items, it's also growth. I'm sure we'll be very interested in what Metro is intending or looking at for the next urban growth report and the what impacts it may have, one on growth and impacts on our transportation system. So welcome, Erin and Ted.
Hi, thank you very much.
I see Erin, but I don't see
Ted's here too.
All right.
There he is. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Key. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Urban Policy and Development Manager at Metro. And Ted is on my staff. Ted, do you want to say hello?
Good afternoon. I'm Ted Reed with Metro's Planning, Development and Research Department, Project Manager for the Urban Growth Management Decision.
So we are just kicking off this urban growth management decision. And so that's why we're here to talk with you about our process, to go over what the schedule will be, to talk about how you can be involved with us and begin conversations. So we're going to have a short presentation, which I think Teresa has for us, and you can bring up whenever you'd like to get that started. Thank you. And the point here is to give this overview and then spend a little time getting your thoughts, answering your questions, and hearing what you hope will be incorporated in this process. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say around this slide. So let's go to the next slide. Of course, we need to start ourselves in the 2040 growth concept. This is our long-term growth strategy for the region. You can see the map here. Pretty easy to see. The growth boundary isn't highlighted really strongly, but you can see that black line because you see the difference between the areas that have colors of yellow and blue and pink as opposed to those who have green and brown. Those brown areas are urban reserves. Those are the areas that have been designated for the next 50 years to serve as the places where we grow and expand our urban growth boundary. And the green areas are rural reserves designated to remain rural. Of course, this plan, we're getting closer and closer to 2040. And of course, we need to work on updating this. But it really does provide a great kind of framework for how we grow over time. You can see a lot of those town centers in pink and our corridors that connect them. And we have seen a lot of growth in these corridors, and Ted is going to touch on that a little bit later. But let's talk about the urban growth management process on the next slide. And it's really in its most basic, what we're required to do by the state is to look at how much land is in demand. What is the demand for growth in the metro area? What buildable land is available inside the UGB to accommodate that growth? And it's just a math equation, and out pops an answer of how much land we need to serve the region, household growth and employment growth over time. However, anyone who's participated in this process or is involved in development knows that it's far more complicated than this simple math equation might indicate. There's a lot of questions about how you determine demand for land. Of course, it's about anticipated growth, what we think is happening in the future based on what's happened in the past. We'll make projections, and Metro's been doing this for a long time, and our projections have been pretty on target. But there's big questions inside of buildable land too. What is actually buildable? And just because there's not a building on it, doesn't necessarily mean that it will be able to instantly turn into housing and jobs. We know that a lot of investment of time and money is required to make those things happen. And so that's a big part of this conversation, is where we believe land is ready to grow and develop. And that's going to be part of the conversation we have together. So let's talk about the ways in which it's more, well, first of all, in the next slide, I'm going to show you how the region has been growing. These are our urban growth boundary expansions. You can see by the color of basically the kind of year. They go in trends, and the yellow are the oldest and the blue are the most recent growth boundary expansions. We're very, very lucky that we have staff like Ted Reed and others at Metro who have been involved in 8 or 10 of these even over time. And so we have definitely a lot of experience in what it takes to do that math equation and to have the complicated regional conversations about where we want to grow and what we think is realistic. But we've also learned a lot over time as we've made these expansions, what areas have developed more quickly and which have not, and what we can learn for the future about what areas we bring into the growth boundary so that they are most likely to develop and provide the necessary areas for the growth we need. With the next slide, I'm going to pass it off to Ted.
Thank you, Erin. So picking up on the theme that Erin was beginning to talk about around land readiness, we know that simply adding land won't result in housing or jobs. So you have to have a lot of other elements in place. But sort of theoretically, the slide's intended to illustrate if you added the land and everything went perfectly, after about 5 years of additional planning, you would start seeing housing development, and that would ramp up fairly steadily through the next couple of decades. But our experience shows us that only happens if you have willing and able jurisdictions, cities, counties, service providers to make this happen. So the Metro Council's decision is part of the answer to ensuring enough housing and jobs in the future. But we also need the work that you all do to make it happen. Next slide, please. This is some work that we had Echo Northwest do for us recently, and this is kind of their summary slide about what it takes to develop land that's been added to the urban growth boundary. These are the factors that they found mattered a lot. Parcel size and developability. In the past, some areas that were added to the urban growth boundary were highly parcelized, had existing rural residential development. That has slowed down intensification of uses in those areas. We've also seen some areas that were added to the urban growth boundary where the market conditions weren't there. Market demand for a particular use wasn't there, and that has slowed things down. The two on the end of the list here are ones that you all are deeply familiar with: the need for infrastructure investment, the pipes, the pavement, the schools, the parks to make these areas ready for housing and job development. And then, of course, that takes local governments and leadership to provide those services. Next slide, please. And what we've seen is, this is rehashing that theoretical production, that blue line there. But what we've seen when we don't have those elements in place, having a willing and able city, county service providers, having market conditions in place, what we see is more like this yellow line. And these are illustrative, don't get hung up on the numbers. We see kind of a very slow ramp up of housing production that extends out several decades, and it just hasn't been accomplishing the goals that we've set forth when land is added to the urban growth boundary. Of course, the idea is that we get more housing, more jobs on those lands. So our focus is very much on working with partners that have a plan for areas to add to the urban growth boundary, have identified some of the issues that need to be sorted out to make sure these areas are productive. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of data to bear out the points that we've been making. These are, think of these as 3 different cohorts of expansions from the past. This is, so 1998, 1999, for instance, you see the number of units in blue that were planned for those areas. And then in yellow, the number of units that have been built to date through the year 2022. So in many cases, these areas were having the same challenges that I was just going through. For instance, Pleasant Valley, infrastructure has been a big challenge out there on the east side. So they've not lived up to the expectations of producing the amounts of housing that we expected. That extends to some of the more recent expansions too. And this is really why we've reoriented our process to respond to city proposals for expansion, so that we know what we're getting when we add an area to the urban growth boundary, when Metro Council does, and have a good sense for how it's going to be served with infrastructure and governance. Next slide, please. just emphasizing this point again, I can't say it enough. Land readiness is essential. We have to have cities, county service providers ready to provide services to turn vacant land into housing and jobs. Next slide, please. Backing up a little bit about how we've changed the system for how we run growth management decisions. Erin talked a little bit about the sort of simple math that we used to do, determine whether there's a need for more land for housing, expand the urban growth boundary based on soil types, go to those areas. This was state law at the time. Go to areas that are not so good for agriculture and expands there. Those are the areas that often have challenging topography, however. And then after expanding the urban growth boundary, ask cities and counties to complete concept plans for those areas. And again, the results we saw when we used this approach was that housing production was slow to take off and oftentimes never did take off. If you can advance forward, please. Under the new system, we still do this work to calculate the number of housing units needed. But as Erin mentioned on the 2040 map, the region has gone through a process of identifying areas that are suitable for urbanization over the long term. So those urban reserves that she pointed out on the 2040 map. And we also now have policy since 2010 that the Metro Council requires that there be a concept plan completed for an urban reserve area before adding that area to the urban growth boundary. Metro Council also provides grant funding for those local planning efforts. And then lastly on this slide, when the council is making decisions about whether to add an area to the urban growth boundary, it's thinking about the outcomes that it might get out of that area. What kinds of housing are going to be produced? What kinds of jobs? How is infrastructure going to be funded? Is there a real strategy for doing that? Next slide, please. To inform the council in that decision making, we complete what's called an urban growth report. That's the analysis that includes things like the buildable land inventory, the forecast. And you can think of it as having two aspects, the employment side and the residential side. So again, on the employment side, we have things like employment site inventory. We pay close attention to industrial site readiness. We look at trends. For instance, we're going to be looking at trends around work from home. In this next urban growth report, it'll have a regional forecast for employment growth. Next slide, please. And on the residential side, similarly, we'll have a population household forecast. We're going to be looking at residential development trends. We're going to complete a regional housing needs analysis. And then something new this time, we'll be looking at historic displacement trends as another piece of information to inform decision making. Next slide, please. So our approach overall to this 2024 growth management decision, you heard me mention it several times, this focus on readiness. I'm sorry, was there a question? Or no. Focus on readiness. Erin will go into this next bit a little bit around feedback, so I won't belabor it here, but we're thinking of some new involvement for stakeholders. The analysis that we'll be doing is going to be differentiating between housing needs and land needs. And then also we'll be differentiating between employment forecasts and what our regional economic development aspirations may be. They may be somewhat different. Advice, as always, we'll be seeking advice from our Metro Policy Advisory Committee. Something new this time, we're also going to be getting advice, or the council will be getting advice from our Committee on Racial Equity. This is a committee that was formed in 2017. This is our first time going to that committee core for growth management decision. You all know that your counterparts at the staff level are on MTAC, the Metro Technical Advisory Committee, so we'll be working with them closely on this work. And then lastly, the urban growth report itself, we think of as a decision support tool. It's not going to provide an answer for this is what you must do. It's going to provide some context for all of these issues around growth and change, and really try to allow the council to make its decision based on the best available information. Next slide, please. Emphasizing this point about how the urban growth report, the UGR, is a decision support tool. And Erin got into this a little bit already as well, around sort of the policy questions that underlie a lot of the technical work that we have to do. Or when we think about demand for land, well, how much growth should we plan for? We live on the border with another state, and they're part of our economic region. So how much growth might go to Clark County, Washington? How much should we try to attract to our region? On the capacity side, what are the implications of planning for considerable amount of redevelopment and infill? So those are the kinds of questions we hope to explore a bit in the urban growth report. Next slide, please. And I believe Erin picks back up here.
Yeah, so Ted mentioned the decision maker on the urban growth boundary is the Metro Council. They will receive a staff recommendation, as well as recommendations from MPAC and our Committee on Racial Equity. So Ted mentioned that already. You can see how MTAC feeds into MPAC by providing advice and feedback. I wanted to focus on this other blue square in the right-hand corner at the bottom. This is a new, for this urban growth boundary conversation, we'll be convening a stakeholder roundtable. We hope to get that group together this summer, and also a youth cohort, which would also come together this summer. Those are new groups that haven't been formed in the past, and the purpose is to include more perspectives into the development of our urban growth report, and to just have a bit more interaction and transparency about the data and information we're collecting as we collect it. We've always had a lot of interaction with you as elected officials and with jurisdictions through MPAC, through MTAC, and through visits to groups like this. But the stakeholder roundtable will bring in some, we hope to have business perspectives, labor, social justice, etc. Our youth cohort will focus on a diverse group of youth who are interested in politics and interested in planning and issues of urban growth. And we expect that group to meet for about a year between this summer and next summer. Also, again, informing the urban growth report and the technical land use group that we're bringing. We always have had a a land use technical advisory group, LUTAG. We've always had that group that's staff from local jurisdictions who are digging into the information coming into the urban growth report and reviewing concept plans, or not concept plans, but requests from jurisdictions for urban growth expansions. So that group will be in place too. So those are some of the other ways in which we're going to be getting information and getting feedback along the way. Next slide. This is helping you understand our schedule. This technical work and analysis is beginning now, as well as we're trying to move into kicking off stakeholder engagement this summer, as I mentioned. Here's the expansion proposals, which I was tripping over in the last slide trying to say. Letters of interest will be due towards the end of this year, in December, and proposals for city expansion will be due in April of 2024. We are launching another round of 2040 planning and development grants, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Our aim is for early May. And so I can answer questions about that and give you a little bit more information once that grant program kicks off in a few weeks. The Metro Council decision will be next summer, or excuse me, the draft UGR will be next summer, and the council decision will be at the end of next year. You can expect that recommendations from MPAC will be happening in the fall of 2024. Next slide. So thank you everybody for having us, giving us the time to give you a bit of an overview and help you understand how we're approaching this. Whatever time we have left, I'd love to have a conversation with you about your thoughts and any concerns that you have or things that you'd like us to think about as we kick off this process.
All right. We'll wait for the slide to go away. Here we go. Questions? Jeff. And then Heidi.
As a veteran of this process a few times, I wonder, Ted and Erin, thank you for your presentation. How much the Cornelius experience is similar or dissimilar to the rest of the region? And where I bring that up is the area we brought in 2014. We're down to the last two phases and they're steamrolling ahead. That's 9 years ago, and we're almost 100% done with that one. We're probably, honestly, about 75% done in filling that. And the one that we had before that, well, that's the Holiday and the Council Creek developments are all completely done. So it seems like we're very divergent from the regions, like Ted, the ones you presented, where there's a very low percentage and takes a long time. Both of those filled up very quickly. Where I see the delta is the region we wrapped our arms around to the northeast, which was basically already developed once before, right? Lower densities, all those. So both of those areas that I'm talking about that filled in very fast were effectively greenfields. So is there any correlation in the data between greenfields and our, I've seen reports in the past that showed historically underutilization of infill, that we'd come into these UGB expansions assuming 25 or 50% redevelopment and seeing more like 5 or 10. Have we seen any changes in the trends on those? And how is the Cornelius experience similar or dissimilar to the rest of the region for greenfield versus infill redevelopment?
Thank you for the questions, Mayor Deline. So we, in terms of experience with urban growth boundary expansions, I don't think it will come as too much of a surprise to this group that we do see some differences on west side versus east side in terms of development outcomes. That generally areas on the west side have moved towards development faster and more effectively than areas that were added to the urban growth boundary on the east side in past years. And again, our focus is on receiving proposals from cities that are willing and able to urbanize these areas. So if we get a proposal on the east side, I think that will be part of the discussion is how will that jurisdiction make it happen. In terms of redevelopment and infill outcomes, that's a question we'll be looking at in this updated urban growth report. In the 2018 urban growth report, which is our most recent one, we compiled some data on redevelopment and infill, and I'm forgetting the exact time frame. I believe it was from 2009 to 2017. We actually had great success with redevelopment and infill in the urban growth boundary. About 76% of the new housing built was through redevelopment and infill. So that is a major source of growth for the region, is using effective, efficient use of lands. That's all according to our collective intentions to make good use of land, so that when we do expand, there really is a need for it.
And then I'd be remiss to not ask the big ugly question. So we are out of land, or Cornelius is. So when are we going to go back to a system of analysis where we look at that? Is that going to come out of this? Because our 20-year growth is gone. I know Forest Grove will speak for themselves, but I know a substantive amount of theirs is probably gone also. And you spoke of the success of the west side and reaching our goals and for development. But where do we go back? Because I'm not sure how I can put in a letter of intent when I have no UGB expandable area left.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mayor Lynn. And we've been speaking with your staff about this issue. You can't put in a proposal for expansion of the urban growth boundary into rural reserves. We're not allowed to expand into rural reserves. So we are limited by that. The urban rural reserve decision that happened was a 50-year decision, which we're how many years into, Ted? Not many.
9. It was 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2015 is our start date after some litigation and re-acknowledgement. So 2065 is the end date for urban rural reserves.
Mayor Lou.
Yeah, sort of, I guess, in a way to piggyback off of that. I mean, I think all of our cities are feeling this housing crisis, and our community members are feeling it very, very deeply. And the West Side has really, I think, done a responsible job of bringing housing in and trying to help this. And I have concerns because, you know, we have all of this land and, you know, not a lot of it is developing the way that it wasn't intended. And so I'm curious in this next round, and I applaud you looking at this in a different sort of way and saying the way that we were doing it isn't working. How do we do it? So how do we look at the land that's in and isn't developing, and how do we value that to take into account that it may be available, but it's not actually doing anything, and potentially look at other land that could come in and contribute to housing. So I'm just wondering, you know, I don't necessarily want to put a value on it in a technical sort of way, but if the lands don't have a history of developing, are they truly contributing in a way in which we can count on that housing in the next 5, 10, 20 years? And if we're counting on it and it's not developing, is that fair to our community that's being priced out of this region because of our land use choices?
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing that up. We are in a housing crisis, and this is going to be a big part of the conversation. I'm glad you brought this up because that's exactly the conversation we're going to have and to determine what buildable land is inside the urban growth boundary is those tough questions about what is actually developable. That definition of developable is exactly what we've been talking about and what you bring up in terms of our expectations. We can't have expectations for land to develop that we know won't. And we've gotten a good set of experience to help us better define what developable means. And so that will be part of the analysis. But we absolutely want to, I think there's also the evolutions that Ted can talk about in terms of the state's requirements. We need to look at both what the housing demand for housing is currently, as well as future growth. So that is a change with this year, as well as looking at displacement and how that feeds into the housing. So we've got some evolutions of this process to address kind of the unique, challenging situation we are dealing with in this housing crisis.
Yeah, and again, I want to applaud your changes in thinking and the way that we did the land swap and really, you know, working in partnership to this. I just, you know, want to make sure we're thinking about it broadly.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mayor Rosner.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation and the great information today. I have a couple of questions. First, I want to go back to, you made a comment, I think it was you, Ted, about success with infill and redevelopment, creating a lot of housing. What's the net number though? And the reason I asked that question is, like, for instance, we have a mobile home park here in town with about 30 units in it that's being redeveloped into single family detached. So we're going from $90,000 affordable housing to probably $600,000 to $700,000 single family detached homes. And it's a net gain of 0 in terms of actual additional housing. On your earlier comment, what was the net gain in housing from like redevelopment and some of these projects? I'm just kind of curious.
I thank you, Mayor, for the question. It's a good thing to clarify. So I don't have the absolute number, but that percentage that I mentioned, the 76% of is net new housing in the urban growth boundary. 76 of the net new housing in the urban growth boundary was through redevelopment and infill from 2009, 2017. Because you're correct, we're not interested in just having status quo number of homes. It's not enough.
Okay, thank you. And then kind of moving on to the urban growth boundary discussion we were just having, some of these points have already been brought up, and And Mayor Delane, talked about their success over there. We've had about 250 acres open in the Brookman area since, going back to, I think, 2009, 2010. And we've had very little traction out there and interest from developers. And part of our challenge is infrastructure, which you mentioned. But it's not just local government solving for that. We have a clean water service project for a sewer line to transit that area that is still not done. It's years delayed. And the kind of a joke in the development world is whoever finds out first that the sewer is reaching a property is the one that buys it. And so we have some significant infrastructure problems. We have about 30 acres inside the urban growth boundary because of terrain that we need that sewer line in, before a developer is going to come in and, even consider developing under that. And I was just curious, I appreciate the fact that you guys are really trying to understand what's been hindering projects. But I do think it's a very local experience. So you might come up with some information, and I think having plans in place to show how we're going to deliver is great. We've had a concept plan in place with Brookman for a decade, and it's not enough. We've got to get some of these infrastructure projects done. We can't fund it all through SDC taxes or SDCs. We need to understand that and maybe prioritize projects in the region so we can open up the land to make sure it gets developed. That was more of a soapbox speech, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd love to respond. Just I'll do my soapbox speech, which I'm hearing this across the region. This is on east side and west side, the cost for infrastructure, the lack of funds anywhere. I wish Metro had a big bank of funds that we could provide that would help us grow into the areas that we've brought into the urban growth boundary, but you all know that doesn't exist. But because I think that we need to join together, this process that we're talking about today is an urban growth boundary decision. The council will make a decision about the urban growth boundary, and we'll base that on data and good information about what's possible. But what you're talking about and what's really important is what changes are we going to make to address some of the issues that we've seen in areas and allowing areas to develop to provide the needed housing that that we desperately need. So I think there's going to be a need for jurisdictions and service providers in this region to come together and talk about the need for these funds and to put some pressure on the state. So I hope that is an outcome that happens as we're working on it. Obviously, this project is not going to solve that, but I hope it's a conversation that can happen while we do.
Yeah, and having Metro's voice at the table in Salem about these infrastructure requirements, is really useful as we move forward and have these conversations. And then one last quick question, I apologize. Ted, you mentioned 5 years of planning once it comes into the urban growth boundary, and that was on all your charts. I have to ask, why does it have to take 5 years? I hear that complaint from developers and folks all the time that it just, for someone to be interested in urban reserves, they're looking at a 5 to 10 year window before they can actually get a return. Are we talking about how we can shorten those timeframes?
It's a good question, Mayor. And that's sort of a general approximation based on experience that we've had. The Metro Council added 4 different areas to the urban growth boundary in 2018 in Beaverton, Hillsborough, King City, and Wilsonville. And all 4 of those areas are either just wrapping up their comprehensive planning for those areas or in the home stretch for doing that. So I think it's probably a question of local staff capacity is part of it. Erin, you may have some more insights into it based on what you're hearing from cities about their needs for grant funding.
I think this is another issue for that list. Mayor, the list that of what solutions we have here. I almost guarantee that when we bring a stakeholder table together that has business and developers, landowners, that we're going to hear this question too, is why does it take so long? So I think that's just it's another conversation that we need to have. We're basing ours on experience, but that's not addressing a solution to a problem.
Yeah, and the grants are great, don't get me wrong, but I also think we have to look at the process and the requirements that we're putting into the process and how
that's right.
Streamline that. So anyways, I'm sorry I've been monopolizing time here. I apologize, folks.
All right, Councilor Van Beveren.
Thank you. I would echo the sentiments that have already been expressed. Really good questions, really good dialogue, informed my understanding. I guess this is a comment. Does Metro take into consideration the growth of the areas outside the UGB, our UGB as a metro area? What I see is they're growing very quickly. North Yamhill County, North Plains, Banks, all of which, and part of that speaks to your comment about a displacement. You know, I think a lot of people are looking to those areas because they're more affordable. But is that, you know, is that something that Metro even considers when they're looking at our housing needs and the needs of our local community?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Yes, we do look into that question. We sort of, as a technical matter, we started out with a 7-county forecast. So that includes many of the areas that you mentioned: Yamhill County, Clark County, Columbia County. That's our economic region, larger economic region. And through part of the process that we go through collectively, there's a determination of how much of that growth is likely to happen in the metro urban growth boundary. I think there's also a good policy question in there that you're hinting at about how much growth should we plan for. And then I would say that you know, part of the answer is which cities are stepping forward with proposals for expansions, because again, our experience has been that just adding areas to the urban growth boundary without that local willingness is not going to result in housing. So we want to remain focused on what you all are proposing for those urban reserves.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a very interesting discussion, and I just have to say, I have questions that I can deal with staff. They don't have to answer it right now, but this last point is very important, particularly important in our district as we develop the industrial capacity and the jobs capacity in the Sherwood, Wilsonville, and Tualatin sort of area. This brings a lot of more concern for what's coming in from Woodburn, what's coming up from Yamhill County, and so forth. And I will look very closely at that. The other things that I'm going to be very interested in is the market has changed. There's increasing density that we see in all the developments that I'm seeing in the area around here, and that's changing some of the assumptions. Obviously, we've had state laws that have changed things in terms of providing a much easier infill proposals, and that's a change. And then I guess, this is a question that I would ask, I'm assuming that all of these new projections will be a little more complicated because now we have to evaluate the needs of each different housing type. Is that correct? Where previously it was just housing, now it's housing by category. And so I guess that's my preliminary question.
Councillor Rosenthal, some of the requirements for what we have to do in our analysis have changed. We will be looking at needs for housing by different income groups. That's something that state laws have been more specific about now. And then there are questions that we've had to answer all along about various housing types. And so we'll be trying to relate the needs of particular income groups for particular kinds of housing. Erin also mentioned earlier that state laws changed so that we now not only look at future housing need, but existing housing need. So that will be something new in our work this time.
It makes it more complicated.
Or fun, depending on how you think about it.
I appreciate that attitude.
Marietta Lane.
I'm going to pick up where Rick kind of left off on there. I think we're absent the case study analysis of understanding. I mean, Mayor Rosner talked about having this particular land that hasn't developed, right? And he's linking it to the infrastructure costs. I know with our southeast area, we were very clear, right, that it was going to require a massive influx of infrastructure. And by the way, the developer, you're going to carry all that, including the pumping station for everybody's favorite kind of waste to get it uphill. But I think we'd be remiss not to look at why are people choosing Camas, Washougal, Ridgefield, Washington, Aurora, Canby, and as Rick mentioned now, North Yamhill County is blowing up, and we're seeing it. And what is the delta rate? Is it just a little bit of reduction in developable cost? Is it housing selection choice? Why, and I'm going to say the magic words, why are we failing? Why are people choosing to move and drive that far? What are we not providing the customer to allow them to make that decision? Say, no, I want to be inside, right? And look at that, both the case study on the developable part of it, like what Mayor Rosner brought up about if the developers are clear and understanding, because we can't just, the development's got to carry its own cost. I'm sorry, but that's what it really does. We don't need the state or the feds to save us. At a $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 home, they need to carry their own sewer, water, and street costs. But what I think we're failing the customers. Why are people moving 20 plus miles out of the core and choosing those locations versus doing anything inside? And is it the housing choice? Is it the livability? What are we failing at that's making it grow so fast outside? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mayor, for raising that. I think it's a really important policy conversation that we need to have as a region.
Mayor Rosner.
I just wanted to say, well said. I agree with you 100%. We need to understand that.
Any other questions? I just got a quick one. Hopefully it's a quick one. So how do you anticipate Metro handling the, you're hearing loud and clear about more housing, but you're also hearing from the manufacturing industrial community that, we need more industrial lands. Obviously, industrial lands take up a lot of space. We're short of that right now. How do you balance that need? How do you anticipate you're going to be able to do that?
I'll start this one off, and then Ted, if you want to respond. Thank you, Mayor. One thing that we're doing, Metro is doing to respond is to provide in this next round of 2040 planning and development grants, a pot of $1 million just for industrial readiness. So to help get industrial lands ready for those for that kind of development. So we're making that resource available to local jurisdictions to get lands ready. And then Ted, do you want to add anything?
Well, Mayor, it's a good question, and it's one that we'll be looking into in the urban growth report, looking at both our land supply for employment uses and what the demand is and what some of the trends are around development for, what kinds of sectors are we seeing a lot of development pressure.
Okay, all right. Any other question? Oh, Tim, your hand's back up again or no?
It's back up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Just to kind of expand on that industrial land ask, I would encourage you to think about the unique circumstances of each city. For instance, Sherwood is 85% residential today. So our need for more jobs land is outsized maybe compared to some other communities. And I think that's really important as we try to encourage people to live and work in the same communities, cut down on vehicle miles. We don't, I have 9,000 people that have to travel all over North Washington County to get to their jobs. So hopefully we can have that kind of thought process going into when these asks come in and what the needs analysis that you're doing focuses on, if that makes sense. Thank you.
It does, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? I just have an ask. If you could maybe put in your calendar visiting us again, maybe after the end of the year as this process continues, to give us an update on the kind of things you're hearing, both from the Metro Council and from your interest groups. It'd be great to hear how this is proceeding over the next year or so. So I just ask that you come back in a few months, maybe winter, after January or so, and give us an update.
Yes, we will absolutely do that. We will come back and give you an update. Thanks so much for having us and for your good, insightful questions and all of the additional important policy questions you've raised that are really helpful. And the conversation will continue. So I look forward to coming back again.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us to item 4C, the Washington County Transit Study Community Engagement Results. We have Dyami Va here, who's going to share the public comments that Washington County gathered on transit improvement needs. Welcome, Dyami.
Great, thank you, Chair. Dyami Va, I'm a senior transportation planner with Washington County. Oh, actually, I have to get used to saying that. I'm the new principal planner for Washington County. So I think Teresa, thanks for pulling this up. So this study is really it's a partnership with cities and transit providers to think about opportunities that were born out of a lot of good work, kind of reflecting back on the Transportation Futures Study, which helped us as a region identify that transit was really had a lot of potential and a lot of demand that was unrealized in Washington County, and had us start thinking, excuse me, thinking about how we can better support transit. So I wanted to note that this is a partnership and funded in part with the City of Beaverton, Hillsborough, Tigard, Tualatin, and Washington County. Next slide, please. So out of this, we identified really an opportunity to look at what transit providers, as well as us at the local level, can do to better support public transit and making it a more viable option for more people. Next slide. So grounded in, you know, all the good work that we do at the local level and a lot of the other good planning work around transit, we've, in working with our community and stakeholder advisors, identified a number of goals to really help guide this study, which are really looking at opportunities to improve more equitable and affordable options, thinking about our environmental, not only impact, but also health benefits that a more active form of transportation can provide. Also thinking about how we can better connect people to opportunity, and keeping this kind of grounded in the user experience. And then, as I mentioned, this is really a partnership, and thinking about how we can better support and make transit a more viable option long term. Next slide, please. So we're about halfway through a year-long process, and we hope to have this wrapped up later this fall with a vision that can inform us at the local level, but also in our conversations with transit providers to hopefully advance how we can improve transit service in the county. Next slide. So I just kind of walk through what our partner and community engagement approach has been. We've convened a technical work group, which includes city and agency staff and subject experts. We've been doing that throughout the process. We have a meeting scheduled this week. We also have convened some more focused conversations, including a stakeholder workshop where we've reached out to community-based organizations and other community groups and advocates to have help us through this process and identifying kind of the goals and develop recommendations. We wrapped up an online open house that your staff and helped advertise, which we appreciate. And so I'm going to share some of those results, as well as some more targeted conversations with community groups, as well as some in-person engagement. So I'm going to kind of walk through what we've heard from those various forums. But first, I wanted to also acknowledge that we've been really kind of documenting, you know, from a technical standpoint, a lot of the ridership and travel patterns that we've experienced over the last couple years, considering kind of pre-pandemic as well as post-pandemic conditions. So we've taken a lot of kind of data analysis to help us identify what is currently being experienced, as well as cataloging kind of what we anticipate in the future. Probably no surprise, we've seen some travel patterns have changed over the last couple of years. We know that, and this is really kind of borne out in the community conversation that we had, but accessing transit is challenging, and where those challenges are just makes it a little bit harder to use that form of transportation. There's major employers within the county that lack service, and so there's some correlation where there's better access to transit, there's higher ridership and mode share within those at those employers. And then no surprise, it takes a lot longer to get to your destination if you're taking a transit trip in certain parts of the county. In some instances and at certain times of day, it's actually faster, but that is more along kind of the core of the max is where that opportunity exists today. Next slide, please. So first, I want to kind of talk about the in-person engagement, where this was, I kind of like to think of this as the Billy on the street, going out and talking to folks where they are. Specifically, we partnered with community engagement liaisons who went out to libraries, transit stops, coffee shops, and really just stop people and ask them some targeted questions around their experience with transit. We got a pretty good response rate. We were able to talk to almost 300 people and ask them kind of what's working well, what's not working well, what are some of the challenges, and we were able to kind of differentiate, from whether they're a current transit user or not a regular transit user. And so we see some interesting differentiation. We're going to be providing a more robust report, so I'll certainly share that out with your staff, and they can share that with you. But in terms of what's working well, we saw it's the affordability, depending on the demographic characteristics, is working well. The convenience, the ability to avoid traffic, some of the barriers. And this kind of was born through a number of the responses we heard was just a lack of feeling safe, and some of the concerns around security, longer travel times, and just not having that good proximity to key destinations. Next slide, please. We were able to engage, have some targeted conversations with folks that serve communities. We talked to the chambers. We talked to affordable housing developers. We had representatives that worked with the unhoused. So really having a broad conversation around some of those barriers and opportunities, and similar themes emerged from those conversations as well. Security, longer travel times. For lower income communities, the cost was seen as being prohibitive. Some of the opportunities, they really, if your community is served by some of the first and last mile community connector services that Ride Connection serves, that really kind of came out in those conversations, that they really enjoyed that service. And then looking for better connections, especially North-South County. And then just general better access to information. Next slide, please. So like I said, in our online engagement, we had, we were able to kind of differentiate and cross-tabulate whether you were a non-transit user or a transit user, and there were some interesting nuances either way, but we asked folks, what gets in the way of taking transit, and for those who are currently not riding transit, we saw that they really benefit, or they really value their time, and so transit being too slow was a major barrier. Looking at safety was a major barrier, and feeling secure and then just not having good access to their destinations were kind of the top themes that were getting in the way of their use of transit. And then on the next slide, we asked which would, what would improve or encourage you to use transit. And this is reflecting the transit users who really wanted to see more reliable, faster service, and then better access improvements were kind of emerging as top priorities. So we have pretty robust data available for us to kind of think about what type of opportunities moving forward. So if we go to the next slide, we'll be taking and synthesizing all of this information that we've heard with our community members. I will note that the responses are fairly, we've done a kind of demographic characterization of the responses and seen that it's fairly representative. We have noticed that there's a gap in kind of the youth population, so we are going to attempt to have more targeted conversations around that community as well. So, but I did want to say, just moving forward, we hope that this effort will really help us in identifying and prioritizing where we can have better transit service throughout the county. Thinking about how we can, at the local level, really support better access and from an infrastructure standpoint, improve transit reliability. And also thinking about the policies and programs that we can do at the local level to support transit service and ridership growth. So next slide. This is just a very preliminary results that I'm sharing today. We will have a final report that we will be sharing towards the end of the month, and sharing that with technical work group. We'll have various briefings. We have one to our commission and at the end of April, and then city council briefings. Certainly encourage, if you want a more robust conversation, happy to come out and have conversations with your city councils as well. And then we'll be compiling this and preparing a draft report, which will include kind of a set of recommendations later this spring that we'll share and have more targeted conversations with the technical work group and our agency partners, with a final report coming out in the fall. And I think that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions and take any comments.
Questions? Council President Hartmeyer-Prigg.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dyami, for the presentation. Will you be seeking to have all the city councils to offer endorsement or adoption or anything as part of those briefings?
We do hope that the outcome of this helps inform your local policy documents. I know that, for example, the city of Tigard just kind of finalized their TSP, but they are looking to have this hopefully inform implementation, and it's certainly going to inform the county's TSP as we're thinking about our future TSP. But I would hope that there is value that you see at the local level, and would encourage you to take whatever action you feel is appropriate to acknowledge that.
Okay. And then do you know, so many of us on this call, we also get to sit on the TV Highway Hope Grant Steering Committee together. And it's a big transit project. We've been kind of debating what that looks like, and the best way to serve our especially the west side, Beaverton out to Forest Grove. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, through the transit plan that you did across the county, or the study, have you any theories or hypotheses around how to reduce some of the bottlenecks where the buses are getting stuck? I know you mentioned sometimes transit is faster and sometimes it's not. but we do know there's kind of some key places where buses just tend to get stuck, cars get stuck too, but any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what this study is going to help articulate is, some of those tools that we know are successful in addressing some of those challenges, making transit more reliable and improve the speed. And, I think they're the types of tools that are being explored in the TV Highway project, which is, allowing transit to bypass some of that congestion where those opportunities are available, which includes, anything from paint treatments to having some dedicated right of way to transit signal priority. So we do hope to help identify that, along major corridors beyond just TV Highway. TV Highway is obviously an important east-west corridor, but and so we're going to learn from and that experience and kind of apply that more countywide as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. Dyami, that's a good report. I really appreciate it. It's also important work that needs to be done. I'm going to channel former Councilor Craddock a little bit about, sometimes you need a complete transportation system before you really achieve its full potentials. And going back to your first picture, one of your slides, the one that showed the red lines going from various places, there were a bunch of red lines going to Tualatin and to Sherwood. What I'm wondering is, can that slide be read as showing, or the red lines and even the black line from Wilsonville, as showing what might be critical gaps in the transportation system, such as a connection from Sherwood to Hillsborough or from Tualatin across the county lines over to Clackamas? Can that be read that way as identifying some potential critical gaps?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I didn't describe that graphic in detail, but it was showing where those travel times between, if you were to drive versus taking transit. So some of those red lines were where it was 3, 4, 5, 6 times longer to take on transit, which is most likely representative of either a major gap in the network, so there's just not that connection available, or somebody has to take multiple, transfer multiple times to get to that destination. So it just takes that much longer.
Okay. Yeah. This is a point Mayor Delaney has made several times in terms of getting to job sites, even from Cornelius. Thank you.
Yeah. Great comment.
Other questions? Mayor Rosner.
Have you shared this with TriMet?
Yep, TriMet's on the team. They're certainly tracking this. I don't know if John may not be super apprised with it at this point, but I know that folks at TriMet have been plugged in.
Yeah, I think as most of us know, this is a bullhorn we've been using with TriMet quite a bit. The lack of, I think of it in terms of we need to get people from their homes to their jobs and back. And so I would agree that one chart, I really like that chart with the red lines, because that really shows where the issues are. So thank you very much for putting that together.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Mayor, I would just add that, yes, we are a part of that steering committee. We're paying close attention to this, and we'll be undergoing multiple planning processes starting this summer that I think will take advantage of the information that is gathered as part of this planning process, identifying better bus opportunities that are outside the central city, as well as our Forward Together 2.0 plan that will be working on future service growth plans that are after our current Forward Together planning effort. So I think this will be very helpful for us. And just wanted to add that we're working on this as well.
Mayor Delane.
I like that it can break some different ground, because now that Garrett and Tim are carrying the messages that I've been tooting for the last forever, it goes on. I was wondering, thank you for the presentation. Have you considered using something like plaid as a color in there for all the missing links? So I'm going to give John a little bit of a hard time, right? Not only do we have deficiencies within the network, but we don't have any network connectors to Canby, Aurora, Newburgh, Yamhill County, my favorite new place that I get to watch and count the cars go by my house from. So I don't know if that's where we balance that, right? Because we have these issues internal to the system, but also I don't know how we get ahead of the growing problem that we don't have transit to get to everywhere else, that hundreds, thousands of people are coming in, cars and cars every day from these perimeters, right? You know, if you go the other way, it's like, well, you can't get from Ridgefield to Portland, but people drive it every day to go to work at Intel and Nike. So they're doing it, but they're not getting on the bus, right? They're driving. So I think we've got to look at that, the total system, right? Internal and external, to where we have opportunities for growth, and just even within Washington County. So thank you.
Yeah, great comment. I know that interregional connectivity is a key element of this. You know, one, I think it's raising awareness that there are some opportunities for transit today, and that, you know, I think whatever we can do to help highlight that, but also identify how we can better serve those markets, I think is an important outcome of this effort.
Other questions? All right. I just have an ask, Dyami, that, yeah, if you could talk to my city manager, to Sherilyn, about maybe doing a presentation to our city council, because we'll be kicking off our TSP here later this year. So this would help inform our TSP.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Thanks. Anything else for Dyami? I don't see anybody hand up. Well, thank you for joining us today.
All right, thank you for having me.
That brings us to item D, the JPAC agenda. I think this is going to be mainly Chris talking. That Mike McCarthy, I don't think, is with us today, so it's going to be the Chris Steppenboss show.
Yeah, I can cover this. Delane, Mayor Delane, you said you hadn't studied up. I have
I'll
the
get my
JPAC.
homework.
Yeah, I have the JPAC agenda, and it is pretty straightforward, except for one item that I think is worth a little bit of your time here today. One of them is sort of regular updates on a new one, the performance of the 24-27 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. Another one is another amendment to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. And then a Unified Planning Work Program. The item says discussion, but there's a resolution attached. So I thought it was action, so that might be a clarification for Metro staff. But the TPAC did recommend approval. If you don't know, the Unified Planning Work Program lays out all of the work, is a federal requirement, lays all the work that Metro will be undertaking in the next year, as well as major regional projects and big projects that get federal funding. For example, Council Creek Trail is in there, but it's a good thing to look at. And Metro gave us all lots of time to review it, and they took in a lot of our edits on the different work programs. The one that is likely to cause some discussion, which is why I thought I was going to share a slide to show you the options. That stuff, it always, allocating funding always takes a little bit of time, and there's 18.8 million in a new federal program called the Carbon Reduction Program. And TPAC had a good discussion on it, so I can share some TPAC comments, and those are folded into what came out on the JPAC agenda last Friday. The last point, you just saw the high-level assessment of their draft RTP project list. I think it'll be pretty much what Ali showed you today. So that is the JPAC agenda. So Teresa, if you want to share the scenarios, we just copied the PDF and thought we could share it with you. So the state got 82.5 million in carbon reduction funds from the federal legislation, and Metro was awarded of that 18.8. JPAC talked about it back in January, and there was some further work that went on over the last few months. And the 1st of April, I guess it was, TPAC saw this, and there are 4 options plus one that TPAC added. Three of the options, A, B, and C, include funding for TV Highway BRT 82nd Avenue BRT, and both of those are intended to support project development if these projects move into the small starts grants from Federal Transit Administration. One of the additions that TPAC made is to say that if for some reason they're not eligible to enter into the small starts grant program because there isn't a locally preferred alternative, that the 5 million should stay in those corridors and continue to make transit improvements and other improvements in those corridors. The other one, the three that are of the transit projects, is the line improvements to line 33 McLaughlin, and these are more transit signal priority improvements without the intent of going into small starts. Each of those three also have a another proposal for the 3 million. One of the scenarios has 3 million proposed for an e-bike program. One of them has 3 million for a safe process school program projects, another one active transportation projects. And the discussion at TPAC, it's always great. They're all three are great programs. There's some concern about the safe process school and active transportation, that these are federal dollars. 3 million region-wide doesn't go very far. Federal dollars are very expensive to use unless you can do a fund exchange and defederalize them. And one of the things back in January, when everyone talked about this, there was a concern that not to want to replicate a regional flexible fund allocation process that everyone had just gone through. So not to sort of skip a bunch of applications, especially for only 3 million region-wide. And then the e-bike program was very attractive in the sense of it looked like something you could get out on the street right away. There was some concern expressed at TPAC about lack of bike lane infrastructure in some of the equity areas, and also about sort of overall how it would be managed. The fourth option, package D, that's here, at least at TPAC, no one was jumping head over heels. You can see that it would, it basically funds RFFA projects that hadn't been, I shouldn't say that, regional flexible fund allocation projects that were wrapped up last November, I think. And this one would go ahead and fund some of those that hadn't been funded. No one was just in love with this. For one thing, 16, I think, of the million goes to Portland. And they're not projects that could be really delivered really quickly. These funds have to be obligated by 2024 and spent by 2029. The fifth package E, this came up at TPAC, and I have to confess I was one that proposed it originally back in January. There was a talk about dedicating 3 million dedicating some of these funds for transportation management systems and operations. These are the technology improvements, the signals and controllers. These are things that make the transit signal priorities work. There's also some new passive safety technology, so the lights don't turn if there's someone crossing the road or a bike in the road. So they're safety oriented and transit oriented. And all of these projects, I should say, is the court's intent is really to reduce carbon, and the climate smart scenarios identified 3 major areas of ability to do that. When that study was done, that program was adopted, and one of them was transit, and the other one was ITS type intelligent transportation system improvements to make the system work more efficiently. And the third was active transportation projects to make it easier to bike and ride and so forth. So I would say that TPAC had a really good discussion about this. We do have 6 new community members that represent different community-based organizations, and I want to give a shout out to their contributions in the discussion. Really, it was nice to hear some different perspectives. So I think this is scheduled now for your discussion at JPAC on Thursday, and then action is scheduled for May, I believe. So I thought this was worth just a little bit more time because allocating funding is always is there, right? So that's just, I was going to share. There's a really good little summary that Metro staff did in the packet that describes these more. So if you wanted, I was just going to introduce that, turn it back to you all.
All right. Yeah. Any questions for Chris on that? Councilor Van Beveren. You're muted.
Just a comment. I know that Hillsborough wholeheartedly endorses option E that Chris just put forward with the plan to enhance transportation system management versus, I mean, for the 3 million versus the other choices with respect to active transportation or e-bikes or I can't remember the third one, but we think that's the best option.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? So Chris, on the TV highway BRT, I saw the note at the bottom there. So the 20 million just gets you the study and the NEPA done, but nothing done. I mean, physically done. $20 million just for planning and then.
Right. It's project development, and think of it as a twofer, because any money you spend on project development is counted as local match. Once you get in, you'll remember this in Southwest Corridor days, it's counted as local match for the project. So it's a step that needs to go through, and you know that during that project development, as we talked about at the last TV Highway Steering Committee meeting, for I guess Mayor Delane and Hartmar and Councilor Hartmar was there, was the need to be continuing to look at other ways to fill the gaps, like other safety improvements. We're going to need to tap multiple sources for that project. So it's a continued planning, but it is a twofer in the sense that project development dollars are used as local match when you get to the grant stage.
Right. Mayor Delane.
I would jump on board with the idea of going with Chris's recommendation for the transportation improvements, right? So the BRTs plus the system on that last option there, because that's it continues to make it safer and better where we're already at. And we already have a federalized project with TV Highway, so $5 million more of federalized money. Well, doesn't go as far as regular money. It's already federalized. We're already going to be doing all the federalized processes. Makes sense to continue to put some federalized money in there. So I can see that. And for those who aren't aware, it seems every time we come up to divvying up money at Metro, a monkey knife fight emerges, and everybody's got their special project or idea of what they should spend it on. So I think the idea of putting it into programs that already have overhead being allocated out of them, right? That option E, that last part of it, right? These are already programs that are getting tapped. They're already existing. We're not trying to start something up. So I think that also adds to the benefit of those particular ones. It's not one of my favorite decisions or recommendations for how to spend all this money, but they're not bad options.
Well, I'm sure you'll have a good discussion about it at JPAC.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments on this item?
For the benefit of Mayor Callaway not being here, is everybody can I get a head nod, a waving hand, or something that your JPAC reps should support the Chris Steffelbach option? I got a couple, 3 thumbs. Is there? All right, if there's disagreement, this would be the time to bring it up. If you really want one of those other options.
I'm fine with it. In the future, I'd like to see more love coming to South Washington County, but I will bow.
Yeah. It's like the Saturday Night Live skit.
Yeah,
no
I
soup
think
for you.
Yeah.
All right.
So, okay, we'll carry that message. I don't know if it'll be me or it'll be or Mayor Callaway on Thursday, but we'll carry the message that that's where our support is desired. Thank you.
Okay. Next up is item E, the impact agenda. Mayor Rosner.
Turn my mic on. So I don't have the agenda yet for our next meeting, which is later in the month. The last meeting, one of our agenda items was a presentation that you got today from Metro on the UGB process. So that should be all very familiar to you at this point. We also got an update on the supportive housing services efforts and the affordable housing bond. which seemed to be going very well in terms of production of new housing in the area based on the money they got. So we also got there's one other item. Oh, they gave us a presentation on what is going to be happening, or the proposals for the Expo Center and some of the changes that they're looking at out there, which I know for us out in Washington County, that's not as big of a deal for us to be thinking about. But more informational, and just getting started on the urban growth boundary process with Metro staff, and there'll be more to come on that. So not beyond that, not much to report at this point.
Okay. That brings us to item number 5, other business and agency updates. I'll start off with Stephen. People have been asking about the DC JPAC trip. So any more detail about that?
Yes, we will get an email out to you all soon, but just a little bit to share. So the trip is planned for the week of June 6th, or for the days June 6th through 8th. And typically people fly out on Monday, which would be the 5th, and then fly back usually on Thursday evening, the 8th. And so the purpose of the trip, as you know, it's really a lobbying trip, going back to DC to meet with our local delegation and talk about some of the priority needs in the region here. And it's always helpful if we're able to present a fairly unified regional voice on those trips. We work hard at the regional tables to help ensure that we have alignment on our top regional priorities. We've also historically tried to schedule a Washington County Day where we actually meet just with our county delegation to talk more specifically about some of the priorities here in Washington County. So there's some planning work still going on around that. Couple of items to share. There is normally a reception on Monday night just to kind of help with coordination and logistics. And then oftentimes a federal delegation reception on Tuesday evening that we coordinate with Metro and TriMet. And then we think June 8th is likely the day for the Washington County meetings specifically. And so if folks are only able to join for one day, that might be the best if you need to. So yeah, and we'll get out some details, logistical details if you're interested in attending. Tom Markgraf at TriMet is trying to coordinate who all will be attending, gathering up some info. And just a reminder that everybody who attends is responsible for making your own travel arrangements and costs, etc. for that. And happy to answer any questions right now, but as I say, we'll get that info out to you soon.
Any questions for Stephen yet? Mary Lynn.
Yeah, just making sure I heard that right, Stephen. It sounds like you're looking at Washington County on the Thursday. Historically, that's been the DOT day. So they're going to do DOT on Wednesday or something instead, is what you're thinking?
That's what it's looking like. Yeah, the schedule's still a little bit in flux, but it looks like the 8th is the preferred date for the Washington County meetings.
And have we solidified enough to assume we'd fly out with the evening flight on Thursday, or do we need to plan on a flight out Friday for the to participate in the Washington County Day?
We would want to schedule around allowing people the option to come back on Thursday night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Other questions on that? All right. During the prep meeting with Chris last week, she brought up that, and this one I'm still clueless on it, to be honest. There's a note here about FEMA's plan for NFIP-ESA integration. So what the hell does that mean, Chris, again?
Oh, you're muted, Chris.
Some of you have been hearing about this, particularly probably if you're in Tualatin or Beaverton, where you have a lot of floodplains. And it's been going around since 2009. I think some of us have put it on back burner thinking it'd never come back again. It has come back. And there was a big LOC, AOC meeting about it in Tillamook. Tillamook has a lot of floodplains, but it's basically about a long time lawsuit that says that the floodplains aren't being regulated in a way to protect endangered species, which our world is primarily salmon, and that there needs to be changes to the National Floodplain Insurance Program to change some regulations to protect endangered species. So it's just the beginning of a process, but there's going to be an environmental impact statement, a NEPA process in a way. And right now FEMA is in the scoping phase, say, you know, looking for what should we be evaluating in this NEPA process. So again, it's some of us, I think some folks maybe are a little bit weary. This has been going on since I think 2009, 2008 back then, but it is back this time and it looks like it's moving forward. So it's just a question if any of you are aware of it or if there's an interest in learning more about it. Yeah.
So I know, yeah, Tualatin has significant floodplain. What other cities in the county might be interested in this?
Yeah. I think we'll know more after the scoping process and the actual analysis starts.
All right.
And some of your staff, we talked about it at the planning directors meeting last month, and some of your staff were tracking it.
All right.
So
Yeah, like Chris was saying, I had no idea this was going on. And, you know, we're significant floodplain here in Tualatin, so it'd be something I'd be interested in following, but I'm glad Chris brought it up. So if you have any floodplains in your cities, you might want to talk to your city staff about the impacts that might occur with FEMA making some changes. Okay. And with the last 5 minutes left, I've got to give the floor back to Chris for an announcement.
Oh, all right. So I want you all to know, to do this without crying, that today is my last WCC meeting as I am retiring as of May 1st. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to have been able to work with you over the last 10 years. It's been a great group. I just think that the collaborative process that occurs in Washington County is just a model. It's just been great to have these opportunities to share input, conversation, collaboration among all the cities and with the county on all these issues of land use and transportation that are both statewide and regional statewide significance. So I just really want to thank you for this opportunity. It's been a tough decision to retire because I do really love the work. I just feel so fortunate that it's just been such a great career experience. What an exciting field to be working in land use and transportation over these last years, many years, in fact. So it may seem soon, but we've been working on this on a transition over here for a long time. If you haven't seen her, I'd like Jessica, can you show so Jessica Peltz has been working with us for months and months. And a few months ago, she filled a vacant policy analyst position. And she has been really key to all things WCCC for some time now. So there will be a very smooth transition. And we've been, Stephen and Erin and Wardell and Dyami, you saw today, we've all been working together to make sure the transitions are smooth. So he'll be fine. So I did sign an agreement with the county with Stephen saying, if you have questions that come up that I can help answering, that I'm available to give you a call or some background or some input. But again, I just want to thank you. WCCC is just a great group. I've always appreciated hearing from all of you. So thank you. And I did it without crying this time, almost.
I want to thank you for all the assistance you've given me over the last couple of years in Washington County Coordinating Committee. I'm going to miss you at, maybe you still can come to the RTAC meetings just for the fun of it.
Oh, just for the fun of it, yeah.
Because you can't walk away from tolling at this point.
No,
It's getting really
no one can walk away from tolling.
And there's, I think you mentioned there might be times when you do come back to help out every once in a while.
It'll be up to Stephen to say if there's a little something like, why in the world are we doing this now? And I can remember or something like that. We'll see.
Well, very much appreciate all your efforts and
thank you.
Enjoy your retirement. We'll probably see you around somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, to Lynn.
I would echo what you said, Frank. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you, Chris, and you will be missed. I'm sure you're prepping us up with a good transition and transfer, but I just wanted to let you know it's just been great working with you, and wish you only the best in your next adventure in this new chapter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? We have we're all right on time. Ooh, this is great. Anything
I
else?
think, I think we had a really, really good discussion today. I really appreciated the participation and great discussions around the UGR as we're thinking about the next urban growth boundary, housing challenges, infrastructure challenges. It's all very complicated. So I really appreciated, I think, a really good discussion, and appreciate the Metro staff, of course, for coming and joining us.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting right on time. Have a terrific afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, everyone.
Congratulations again, Chris.
We'll miss you.
Yep.